Ever get that feeling where you just want to like really dive deep into something? You know, like get right down into the guts of it without getting totally lost in all the like super technical stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's exactly what we're doing today. We're taking a deep dive into those like really foundational sounds of electronic dance music,
Hmm.
the sonic building blocks that make you want to like nod your head and move your
You
feet.
got it. We've got a whole bunch of like really interesting insights here from those like basic, super simple waveforms
Hmm.
that are like the very starting point, all the way to the iconic instruments that kind of like define the whole genre and those like signature sounds you instantly recognize in tons of EDM tracks.
Hmm.
Our mission today is to like hand you the most important knowledge about all these different building blocks, like their history, what makes them unique,
Hmm.
and how they're used to create the music you love.
That's right. No information overload here, just the core essentials. So let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start with a real workhorse, you know, one of those sounds you hear all the time in EDM.
Okay.
The saw wave. Now, picture the teeth of a saw, right? That diagonal rise or fall, followed by a sharp drop. Or the other way around. That's basically like what a saw wave looks like visually and electronically. Well, it's a waveform, you know, one of those non-sinusoidal ones made by an oscillator in a synth. You can almost think of it as like a really, really lopsided triangle wave.
Yeah, and it's kind of wild how that like simple jagged shape turns into a surprisingly complex sound, right?
Totally.
Sonically, a saw wave is, well, it's bright, it's buzzy, and honestly, it can be pretty harsh.
Yeah, for sure.
And that all comes down to its harmonic content. So think of it like a guitar string, right? When it vibrates, it doesn't just make that one main pitch, it also makes like quieter, higher tones called harmonics.
Hmm.
And a saw wave, well, it's packed with both even and odd harmonics, making it like super rich in overtones. Compare that to a square wave, which only has odd harmonics and sounds kind of hollow, or a pure sine wave with no harmonics at all, just a smooth single tone. The saw wave wins when it comes to having a full spectrum of these tonal components.
Yeah, that's so cool. And it's that abundance of harmonics that makes it so incredibly versatile.
Right.
Like it's like this fully loaded sonic toolbox. That's why it's like the go-to waveform for subtractive synthesis. You start with this harmonically dense sound and then use filters to kind of carve away the frequencies you don't want.
You know what's really interesting? I've even read that it can sometimes sound like brass instruments or even like bowed strings, like a violin. It really like bridges the gap between those synthesized and acoustic sounds.
Exactly. That inherent richness is exactly why it's such a crucial starting point. I mean, the sheer harmonic complexity of the saw wave lets it be shaped into so many different sounds. You can do almost anything with it.
That's so cool.
And speaking of shaping sounds, you can't really talk about saw waves in EDM without bringing up the legendary supersaw.
Right, the supersaw. That's like that huge, almost like overwhelming wall of sound you hear in tons of tracks.
Yeah.
So this sonic behemoth, it first showed up with the Roland TR-808 synthesizer back in 1997. What's the secret behind that? Well, what's super interesting is that it's a pretty straightforward idea. You just take multiple sawtooth oscillators, the JP8000 originally had 7, and detune each one just a tiny bit.
Mm.
And that creates a massive sonic impact. Imagine a bunch of people singing the same note, but each one is a little bit off key.
Okay, yeah.
That subtle difference makes a really spacious, thick, and wide sound. It keeps that like sharp, buzzing edge of a regular saw wave, but amplifies it with this like massive harmonic presence. That's why it's so perfect for both super powerful lead melodies that cut through the mix and for lush, evolving pad sounds that fill everything out. And it stayed so popular in EDM because people love those like huge, harmonically rich textures.
Oh, yeah, you hear it everywhere these days. So how are producers actually using this super saw magic in their tracks?
Oh, all sorts of ways. You'll hear it in those like big emotional peaks in trance and big room house breakdowns. Give it a long release, play some chords, and it just washes over you.
Yeah.
For more like foundational pads, they might use longer attack and release times, filter off some of the high frequencies to make it softer, and add some reverb to give it that really expansive feel.
Yeah.
But it's not all about those like big epic sounds. You can actually go in the opposite direction too. Reduce the detuning, go monophonic so it's all in the center, add some glide between notes, and pile on the distortion. Suddenly you've got a gritty, low-end bass sound that can work in vintage-inspired tracks or in totally modern stuff.
Wow.
For leads, a common technique is to layer the supersaw with another oscillator an octave up, blend it in, and add glide and reverb, like that classic soaring lead sound. Oh, and if you slap a fast filter envelope on a supersaw, you know, where the filter quickly opens and closes, you can get those sharp, percussive pluck sounds that are perfect for rhythmic melodies.
It's incredible how many different sounds you can get with just one basic waveform.
It really is.
You also mentioned using saw waves for sub-bass frequencies. How does that work?
Yeah, so even a single saw wave
Mm.
has energy down in those lower frequencies. So if you filter out the higher harmonics, you can focus on that fundamental tone and the lower overtones to create a solid foundation for the low end.
Okay.
It might not have that like pure round thump of a sine wave sub-oscillator,
Yeah.
but a filtered saw wave can add a little more character and a subtle harmonic complexity to the sub-bass, especially when you layer it with other bass elements.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, we can't forget hardstyle. Those soaring energetic leads are like their signature sound.
Absolutely. Hardstyle is almost synonymous with those super uplifting, euphoric leads built on layered saw waves. Producers in that genre love to stack tons of saw wave voices and detune them aggressively to get that incredibly bright, cutting sound that cuts right through everything else in the mix.
So cool. Do you have any specific tracks in mind where we can really hear all these saw wave variations in action?
Tons. For a classic supersaw sound, check out Rank One's Airwave from 1999. That track uses the supersaw for both the main melody and a lush pad sound
Oh.
for those hardstyle leads.
Oh.
Almost anything by artists like Headhunters, Noise Controllers, Brennan Hart, or D-Block and ST Fan will do.
Cool.
Tracks like Headhunters, Dragonborn, and Noise Controllers Solar are perfect examples, and there are tons of trance tracks that use supersaw leads for that driving, energetic feeling. For saw waves, used as plucks, Deadmau 5's Faxing Berlin is a great example. And for bass, check out Artists in the Future bass and melodic mid-tempo scenes. Obio is amazing at making those really fat bass sounds by layering saw waves, often with fine waves.
Okay, so the saw wave is clearly like a pillar of EDM.
Totally.
Now let's move on to the instrument that makes all this sonic manipulation possible, the synthesizer. So in its most basic form, what is a synthesizer?
So at its heart, a synthesizer is an electronic musical instrument that generates audio signals using electronic components. Unlike acoustic instruments that create sound through physical vibrations like the strings of a piano or the body of a guitar synth, use electronic circuits, usually starting with oscillators that make those basic waveforms we've been talking about.
Okay.
This means that synthesizers have this almost limitless ability to generate a huge variety of sounds, and it's like totally changed music creation. Whether they're analog synths that directly manipulate electricity or digital synths that simulate those processes, synths give us incredible flexibility in shaping unique sounds.
Yeah, they really do. So the core principle is generating sound through electronic means rather than like physical movement, right?
Exactly.
That makes it so different. Now, when did these like sound shaping boxes first appear?
Well, what's interesting is that the earliest forms of electronic sound generation actually predate what we think of as modern synths. Like, think about the late 19th century. There was an instrument called the dynamophone. And then there was the theremin in the 1920s, which you might have heard of.
Yeah.
Then in the 1950s, there was the RCA electronic music synthesizer Mark I, this massive room-sized machine. But the real turning point was in the 1960s with Robert Moog's modular synths.
Oh, right.
These were the first synths to really popularize those sine, saw, and square waves that we talked about earlier. And the Mini Moog, which came later, made that technology a lot more accessible to musicians.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Then in the 1970s, we got digital synthesizers. And those really took over pop music in the 1980s, the Yamaha DX7 being a great example.
Oh, yeah.
And then in the 1990s, software-based synths came along, and we could make music right on our computers. That opened up so many possibilities.
It really did. It's crazy to think about how far it's come.
Yeah. Early on, people thought of synths as like this avant-garde kind of weird thing. But they quickly found a home in psychedelic and experimental music. And today, you could hardly find any genre of music that doesn't use synthesizers. They're like absolutely essential.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Wow. From those massive analog systems to like software that fits on your laptop. What an evolution.
Totally.
Now, you mentioned different types of synthesis earlier.
Right.
Could you break down some of the main techniques that we see in EDM?
Yeah, definitely. So subtractive synthesis is probably the easiest one to understand, and it's super important historically. It's like this. You start with a sound that has a lot of harmonics, like a saw wave or square wave. Then you use filters to like carve away or boost specific frequencies.
Okay.
You're subtracting from the harmonics to shape the sound. People often say it has a warm and rich character. Then there's additive synthesis. This is almost the opposite approach.
Yeah.
You build a sound by layering together lots of individual waveforms, usually sine waves. Each one contributes a specific frequency to the overall sound.
Cool.
And then there's frequency modulation, or FM synthesis. This one's a little more abstract. It's like this. You have one oscillator that controls the main pitch of the sound, We call that the carrier wave. And then you have another oscillator that rapidly modulates the frequency of that first one, the modulator wave.
Okay.
This rapid modulation creates these complex, often harmonically rich sounds. People describe them as bright, glassy, or even chilly. FM synthesis became popular in the 1970s and uses what are called operators. These are basically individual oscillators arranged in different patterns called algorithms to achieve these really intricate modulations.
Wow, that sounds complicated.
Yeah, it can be. But then you've got wavetable synthesis. This is super popular in modern EDM. Imagine you have a bunch of different waveforms stored digitally in a table, and the synthesizer smoothly cycles through these waveforms as you play a note, or as some other modulation source controls the progression. This creates sounds that evolve and morph in really cool ways, creating complex textures. Some popular wavetable synths in EDM are Serum, which is known for its visual interface and the ability to create your own custom wavetables, as well as Massive X and Vital.
Cool.
Beyond those core techniques, there's also phase distortion, sample-based synthesis, where you manipulate recorded sounds, granular synthesis, which breaks audio into tiny grains and rearranges them, and physical modeling, which tries to simulate how real-world instruments work. And then there are hybrid synths that combine different techniques. Those can create some really clean and versatile sounds.
That's a pretty amazing sonic toolkit. It really shows why synths are so central to EDM. They're not just making sounds, they're like creating the core elements of the music.
Yeah, that's right. Synthesizers are the real workhorses in EDM. They're responsible for everything from soaring melodies and bone-rattling bass lines to those atmospheric pads and intricate rhythmic textures. The sheer amount of sonic flexibility they offer through all those different synthesis techniques, the ability to load custom waveforms and samples, and the really advanced modulation options mean that producers can make sounds that are always evolving and surprising. And then you've got features like multiple oscillators that can be layered and detuned, a variety of filter types to sculpt the sound, and built-in effects add character. Oh, and we can't forget the huge libraries of presets that come with most synths. Those can provide instant inspiration or be a great starting point for creating your own sounds.
Yeah.
You'll also see that certain types of synthesizers are popular in specific EDM subgenres. Wavetable synths are really popular for making those modern dynamic sounds, while virtual analog synths like Silent One and Diva are great for getting the warmth and character of classic analog circuitry.
That's super interesting. Okay, so we've talked about how powerful and flexible they are. Let's talk about some specific, iconic synth sounds that you hear all the time in EDM.
All right. We already talked about the supersaw, which is super versatile across so many genres. You can use it for leads, pads, and even bass. It's super iconic.
Yeah.
Then you have the Reese bass, that deep, rumbling, detuned sound that's really popular in drum and bass, dubstep, and garage.
Oh, yeah.
That sound actually originated in a track by Kevin Saunderson called Just Want Another Chance under his Reese alias, but it was really popularized in jungle and drum and bass by Ray Keith's track Terrorist.
Right.
Techno stabs are another classic, those short, often chordal hits that give techno so much of its drive and tension. You can make those using various synthesis methods, including FM.
Okay.
Then you have plucks, those short percussive sounds, often made using saw waves, with fast filter and amplitude envelopes that are really common in melodic lines and arpeggios. And pads, of course, are essential for creating atmosphere and providing harmonic foundations. You'll hear everything from layered supersaws to simple triangle waves used for pads, often with slow attack and long release times. Oh, and we can't forget the rave hoover, that super aggressive, almost buzzing synth sound that was everywhere in early rave music.
Man, those names really do paint a sonic picture in your head, don't they? It's like they're part of a secret sonic language in the EDM world. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about something that's as much of a legend as it is an instrument. The Roland TR-808.
Oh, the 808, a true classic. This drum machine, made by Roland from 1980 to 1983, was a total game changer. It was one of the first drum machines to let you program your own drum patterns. Before that, you were pretty much stuck with preset rhythms. And get this, when it first came out, it was actually a commercial flop because people thought its synthetic drums sounded too unrealistic compared to real drums.
Really unrealistic, and now it's like one of the most sampled and imitated sounds ever. How did that happen?
It's a really cool story. In the mid-1980s, when it started showing up on the used market, it became really cheap, especially for new artists.
I bet.
And people loved how easy it was to use and how distinctive its sounds were, especially that deep, booming bass drum. And since Roland only made about 12,000 units before they stopped production, it became even more desirable.
Yeah.
So it became super important in the development of early electronic, dance, and hip-hop music.
Oh, yeah.
Tracks like Africa Bambaata's Planet Rock and Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing were some of the first to really showcase its unique sound. In the end, the 808 has been used on more hit records than probably any other drum machine. It's now considered one of the most important inventions in popular music, right up there with instruments like the Fender Stratocaster. And of course, its sounds are now built into pretty much every music software and modern drum machine, and there are tons of software emulations available.
Wow, it went from being a flop to an icon. That's amazing.
It really is.
That deep bass drum you mentioned is really its signature sound, isn't it? You hear that thump everywhere.
You really do.
Yeah.
And when people talk about 808 bass these days, they're usually talking about those really deep, booming sub-bass lines that come from the 808's kick drum sound,
Okay.
not a dedicated bass synth voice on the machine.
Hmm.
The 808 used analog circuits to generate all of its sounds, including that bass drum. And that bass drum is surprisingly rich in harmonics, even though it's focused on those low frequencies.
Interesting.
It can actually create frequencies way down in the sub-bass range, below what most smaller speakers can even reproduce.
Wow.
You can also shape the bass sound quite a bit using the 808's tone, and decay knobs, increasing the decay, for example, can give it a longer, more sustained bass-like quality. The original 808 didn't have a dedicated tuning knob for the kick drum, but producers quickly learned that they could mess with its pitch to make these really deep and powerful bass lines. These days, a lot of 808 bass sounds are actually made using sine waves or heavily filtered square waves to really emphasize those ultra-low frequencies. We're talking like 20 to 100 hertz. And distortion is super important for adding that characteristic warmth, saturation, and harmonic bite that makes it cut through.
Yeah, that low-end power is so essential to so much of EDM. How are producers using these 808 bass lines in their tracks?
They're mostly used to add power and energy. And you hear them in tons of electronic genres: techno, house, trap, you name it. Like we said, it often starts with taking that iconic kick drum sound and pitching it down, sometimes several octaves. Producers often fine-tune these 808 bass lines to make actual melodic bass lines, so it's working on both a rhythmic and harmonic level. Layering is also really popular. Making a copy of the 808 track and pitching it up an octave can add depth, complexity, and character to the bass sound.
Right.
And then there's sidechain compression, where you briefly lower the volume of the 808 every time the main kick drum hits. This not only stops the low frequencies from clashing, but it also makes that distinctive pumping effect that's so common in EDM. And of course, good mixing, especially using EQ to carve out space for the 808 and the kick drum, is super important for making that low end clear and punchy.
It's amazing how this one piece of hardware that people thought was a failure at first is still shaping music today,
It really is.
even decades after it was discontinued. It's so cool.
It just shows how unique and adaptable its sounds are. The 808 sound is still incredibly popular and has been evolving in modern EDM, showing up in practically every subgenre: trap, hip-hop, house, techno, even pop music. It first became popular in the 80s in hip-hop, but it spread quickly from there.
Right.
And in the 2000s, the 808 kick became super important in the sub-heavy sound of trap music. And producers are still experimenting with it today, pushing its boundaries through sound design and processing. The fact that you can now get it sound so easily in software emulations and DDWs has only made it more popular and versatile.
For sure. You mentioned a few key tracks and artists earlier when you were talking about its history.
Yeah.
How do those specifically relate to its influence on EDM as we know it today?
So some of the first tracks with the 808, like Africa Bambaata's Planet Rock from 1982 and Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing from the same year, weren't exactly EDM as we know it now, but they were super important because they showed what the 808 could do in electronic and dance-oriented music.
Oh.
Those tracks laid the foundation for a lot of the rhythmic and sonic ideas that became central to EDM. Moving on. Although our sources didn't specifically focus on EDM artists in this historical context, the fact that the 808 was so widely used in genres like trap has had a huge impact on modern EDM.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Artists like Lil Wayne, Rihanna, Missy Elliott, and Kanye West, whose album 808s and Heartbreak really changed the way people use the 808, were all pioneers in trap music. And a lot of artists work across both trap and EDM, so the techniques and sounds that came from trap, especially those focused on the 808, have been adopted and adapted within EDM.
Right.
Artists like Skrillex and Travis Scott, who are definitely part of the EDM and trap world, are known for their heavy 808 use. So the fact that the 808 was adopted so early on by the artists who basically invented EDM meant that its sound became a core part of the genre's DNA.
Yeah.
And it's still being used in pop and hip-hop today, which are constantly influencing and borrowing from EDM.
Yeah.
So 808 is still relevant and evolving within electronic music.
That's so cool. Okay, so We've explored some of the most important foundational sounds and a legendary instrument.
We have.
Now let's talk about some other popular dance music sounds that you hear all the time in EDM.
Okay, sounds good.
What else is there?
Let's go back to the respace for a second.
Okay.
It's such a common and versatile sound, like we talked about earlier. It's that rumbling sub-bass sound that's known for being distorted and kind of evolving. And it has this thick buzzing quality because it's made by layering and slightly detuning multiple sawtooth waveforms. That creates a really rich texture of harmonics and a subtle chorus effect in the low end.
Cool.
It often has a dynamic, pulsing, or evolving quality because producers use filters and LFOs on it. You can even make it super aggressive and distorted.
Right.
It originated in Detroit techno with Kevin Saunderson's Just Want Another Chance, but became a staple in jungle and drum and bass, largely thanks to tracks like Ray Keith's Terrorist.
Yeah.
You also hear it in a lot of dubstep, where it's often heavily modulated and really intense. It's less common in traditional techno and house, but it can be used to make a really rich and moving low-frequency backdrop. It's so adaptable in terms of layering, distortion, and modulation that it's a really popular choice for adding depth and movement to the low end.
Awesome. What about those sharp rhythmic sounds that are so important in techno? The
Yeah.
techno stabs.
Yeah, those are absolutely essential for creating that driving energy and sense of forward motion that defines techno.
Yeah.
They often have a really clear, harmonically rich quality and are often built using basic waveforms like sawtooth and pulse waves.
Okay.
And they sometimes use minor chords to give them a darker or melancholic feel. Producers often use LFOs to modulate things like pulse width, which creates a sense of movement within the stab.
Yeah.
Using unison and subtle detuning can add width and harmonic richness. Filters and amplitude envelopes are super important for shaping how they sound over time, usually with a very snappy attack and a controlled, often short decay. High-pass filters are key for making sure they don't muddy up the low end, and effects like distortion, delay, and reverb can add depth and character. It's interesting that some of the most classic techno stabs are actually samples from old soul and disco records, which gives them a unique vintage vibe. Whether they're made with a synth, the FM donk sound made using FM synthesis is a great example, or sampled, they have a crucial rhythmic role, building tension and driving the track forward.
Yeah.
And these days, you can find tons of synth plug-in presets that are specifically designed to create those classic and modern techno scabs.
Cool. We can't forget about those manipulated vocal bits that are so popular now, especially in some of the newer EDM styles. What's the story behind those vocal chops?
Vocal chops are literally what the name suggests, short, isolated sections of vocals that have been digitally cut up, messed with, and rearranged to create new sonic textures.
Huh.
They can be really energetic and rhythmically interesting. Effects are super important for shaping vocal chops. You'll hear a lot of reverb and delay, especially to get that big anthemic sound that's common in festival tracks.
Right.
Distortion can add grit and aggression, while EQ and filtering help to carve out space for them in the mix. Pitch shifting and time stretching are often used to create unique and attention-grabbing variations. You can even layer vocal chops in different octaves to add power and fullness.
Wow.
And if you get creative with the slice points and the order you play them back in, you can make those glitchy, stuttering effects.
Yeah.
They're super versatile, and you can use them in tons of ways as catchy hooks, for transitions between sections in intros and outros, and even to build complex textures and rhythmic patterns that almost function like melodies. You can even stretch them out and process them to make them sound like atmospheric pads.
That's so cool.
You hear them a lot in genres like future bass, melodic house, and trap, and artists like DJ Snake, Bang, Grank, Porter Robinson, and Madian, and Skrillex are all known for using vocal chops in really creative ways.
Yeah, those guys are amazing. What about those short, punchy sounds that are often pitched and used for melodies and arpeggios? Those are the plucks, right?
Exactly. Plucks are those short, percussive sounds with a really sharp attack and a fast decay. They usually have a clear pitch and are really useful for making catchy melodies, intricate arpeggios, and rhythmic chord progressions.
Okay.
Like we said when we talked about the saw wave, you can make plucks using all sorts of waveforms, including saw waves, by setting the amplitude and filter envelopes to have a short attack and decay.
Right.
Filters are often used to shape their tone, and effects like delay and reverb can add space and depth to them so they sit nicely in the mix. You hear them all the time in genres like trance, house, and progressive house. deadmau5 is really well known for his signature pluck sounds.
Totally. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about pads, those long, evolving synth sounds that add so much to the mood and emotion in EDM.
Yeah, pads are essential for setting the atmosphere and providing that harmonic foundation and emotional depth in a track. They're characterized by their sustained quality and usually have a gradual attack so they fade in gently and a long release so they fade out smoothly.
Okay.
You can use a bunch of different waveforms to create pads, from smooth sine and triangle waves to richer saw and supersaw waves, each with its own unique tone. Effects like reverb and chorus are super common for making them sound bigger, wider, and more lush.
Right.
They're crucial for creating those emotional, atmospheric backdrops in so many EDM genres, from the epic sounds of trance to ambient music, deep house grooves, and the futuristic sounds of future bass. You'll hear them used for playing long chords, creating droning textures, or adding subtle, evolving sonic layers that really fill out the mix.
That's awesome. You put together a helpful table that sums up all these popular dance sounds for us, right?
I did. It just gives a quick overview of the respace, techno stabs, vocal chops, plucks, and pads, describing their key characteristics, and the EDM subgenres, where you usually hear them. It's like a handy little cheat sheet.
That's perfect. This has been a really cool deep dive into the sounds that define EDM.
It really has.
Those sounds are the backbone of so much electronic music. Understanding their characteristics, history, and how they're used is super valuable for anyone who wants to produce or just appreciate EDM on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
And we shouldn't forget that these sounds are constantly evolving, right? Producers are always experimenting and pushing boundaries.
Exactly. Mastering these fundamentals isn't just about copying what's been done before. It's about getting the knowledge and understanding you need to unlock your own creativity in EDM.
Yeah, that's so important. So for anyone listening who wants to learn more, what would you recommend they explore next?
Definitely spend some time exploring the world of synthesis itself. Play with different types of synthesizers and experiment with those synthesis techniques we talked about. Also, learn about effects processing. See how reverb, delay, distortion, and compression can transform those basic sounds into something totally new.
Okay.
And pay attention to the art of arrangement. Learn how these sounds work together in a full track to create a cohesive and impactful sonic experience.
Those are some great tips. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder. The Roland TR-808 went from being a commercial flop to becoming a total icon that changed music forever.
Totally.
So what sounds do you think might have that kind of potential today? What currently unrealistic or unconventional sounds do you think could become the foundational elements of EDM in the future? It's something to think about until our next deep dive.